coming today. My name is Becky Zrimzek. I'm Carleton class of '89 and Assistant Vice President for External Relations here at the college. I'm pleased to introduce Andrea Burke from the great class of '88, who has led a group of alumni called Endeavoring to Do Better, who've been working very, very hard over the past few years on researching Carleton's history related to gender equity and sexual violence. And they're here, Andrea and friends are here today to present alumni perspectives on those issues and focusing on student activism and advocacy, and also placing Carleton within context of the national context of these issues. Thanks. President Byerly is also here with us today, as is Laura Merrill, who is our Assistant Dean of Students and Title IX Coordinator, who presented earlier this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. I'm going to try to use my voice. Can you all hear me okay? All the way back? Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Becky, and thank you. Oh, that was helping us. Oh, yeah. Okay. This is going to be a lifetime experience. I'm so sorry. So thank you, Becky, for that introduction, and thank you all so much for coming here. I really appreciate your presence and your support for this. I want to note that not only is President Byerly with you, thank you so much, really, President Byerly is making this possible today. As mentioned, is our Title IX, or Carleton's Title IX coordinator. She's here today and can take question and answers if they come up. And also I want to mention that Tom Lamb, the archivist, is here somewhere. There he is. And he was a tremendous help with 3 years of research and at least 4 people who contacted him for a lot of different things. Thank you, Tom. So, let's see, here we are, endeavoring to do better. Thank you so much. I want to quickly mention too that we have people here who have helped on the project. Austin Dahl has done a tremendous job all the way through and put in a huge amount of work just in the last 72 hours, making all sorts of things operational that were not. Just a little bit of that. Who is not here today, but she's also a class of '88. She did everything. She did research, she did writing, she did helped design the website. So also grateful to her. And Sue Everson is here today, and she designed not only the best part of this slideshow, we stuck some things in that don't look quite as good, but also the panels that you didn't get to see, the exhibit panels. This presentation is happening in its stead. So, some of you may already know Endeavoring to Do Better. For those of you who don't, this all got started in 2017 when I read a piece in The Voice that was talking about current policies and procedures related to campus sexual assault. And the article noted high-profile cases from Vanderbilt to Virginia, without noting Carleton's own high-profile case that happened in 1989 when 4 survivors of assault here at Carleton filed a federal lawsuit for the college's mishandling of their complaints. So when I was a student in the mid-'80s, we had a brand new policy, which, by the way, students were the first one to alert everyone needed to be written. In the early 80s, there was a 2-part article in the Carletonian about rape on campus, sort of alerting everyone to the fact that this was not intruders, it was acquaintance rape, and saying, we need a policy. There's no protocol for someone. There's no dean of rape. We need someone to go to. We need to know what to do. And as a result of that came the first policy. But that first policy had some serious flaws. It said that sexual assault was a kind of sexual harassment. And that allowed the dean of students, Dean Rosenrod, to tell survivors who came to him to report being raped that there was no way to bring forward a case of sexual assault, a charge of rape. They could only bring forward a charge of harassment. And so when those charges went through, of course, the Judicial Hearing Board was ruling on things like unwanted kissing instead of on rape. And so they handed out punishments that were, of course, absurdly lenient for the actual crime. So, and then what that led to, of course, is that rapists remained enrolled and they raped again. So, the problem with those wrist slaps, next slide. I'm a little late with this. The problem with that wrist slapping is that it only seemed to increase the violence and the boldness of the assaults. So, for example, when one assailant attacked his fourth victim, he locked her in his room, put his hands around her throat, threatened to kill her, raped her, and held her hostage for 5 hours. And when she reported this to Dean Rosenrod, of course, it was once again given the lesser unwanted touch charge instead of sexual assault. And when it went to the Judicial Hearing Board, he was suspended for a year. The ruling was suspension for 1 year. And she wanted to protest that, and so she wanted to bring her case before the Board of Appeals. President Lewis met with her several times and told her she couldn't, that there was no appeals, and she was not allowed to bring an appeals. But she showed him the place in the policy where it said that she could bring an appeals, and she took it to the Board of Appeals, and then on from there to the Board of Trustees, both of which upheld the original ruling. So the rapist who had been reported for rape 4 times was suspended for 1 year. And when he came back, the first thing he did was overcome his no contact order. He immediately, what is the word for that? He immediately violated his no contact order. And when the survivor went to Dean Rosenrod to complain about that, Rosenrod told her, I can't help because I didn't put the no contact order in writing. So my hands are tied. Then the assailant returned and began stalking her and escalating his stalking. And when she went back and complained to Rosenrod and said, I want to file a fresh sexual harassment case for the way I'm being treated here, he told her that the assailant was just trying to get a rise out of her, and that if she pursued the case, that he might do something really dangerous to her. So she was not allowed to bring forward another charge. Students who were observing what was going on at the time were coming up with all sorts of different ways to try and get safety and transparency and accountability. One of the things they did in 1987 was put together this Social Policy Committee subcommittee for rewriting the policy, writing policy reforms. And they came up with 9 policy reforms. This was a majority student body. It was like 8 students to 2 faculty, I think. And they put together 8 different policy reforms that were things like being able to change rooms, being free from being questioned on your sexual history as a survivor in a Judicial Hearing Board process. The big thing, though, was that it put in a stipulated minimum range of punishments for each level of offense, so that you had an escalating punishment to match each crime. But that was not enough. So the plaintiff's report, when they filed their case, was that Rosenrod delayed their cases, downgraded the charges, and actively discouraged them from going to the police. That case was settled out of court, so we don't know what exactly what was agreed to, beyond that there were changes to campus policy and there was a monetary settlement. But it was a groundbreaking case. It was the first, or one of the first, that was brought by students against a college for the mishandling of sexual assault complaints. And it led very quickly to 1 national piece of legislation and 2 state pieces of legislation that were directly responding to the allegations made in this suit. So, seeing that omission in the Voice article made me concerned that we were burying our history and even national history. And that we weren't owning up, more importantly, to how the mishandling of those cases had harmed people who were members of our community. So after that article came out, I did some research and I started looking into how it looked in decades since I had left. And what I found was that students, years and years after I left, and repeatedly, were dealing with problems with campus sexual assault, and in particular, serial predators and adjudication issues. So I wrote an article about my concerns in medium.com, and that led to a conversation which led to the formation of Endeavoring to Do Better, and one of the key concepts we had from the start as a group was that we really felt it was important for the college to acknowledge this history, acknowledge harm done, think about if there's any changes that need to be made, and try to heal, try to repair from harm. And so we landed on the motto, reckon, reform, repair, as a shorthand to help people understand the mission. We got together, and this is what we did. We started reading back issues of the Carletonian. We read every week for 60 years. We also worked with archives, thank you again, Tom, and public documents like lawsuits and newspaper coverage. We reviewed all of the major policy changes from 1983 to 2010. We interviewed alums and we interviewed survivors. So some of the data we collected there, by the way, is on some of the tables there, and you are welcome to look through it. Although I will tell you that the website is much more complete and looks better too. So by the end of the 80s, this is 1989 now, students were working on more changes to the policy because they had seen that even after the 9 reforms they brought in 1987, it was not sufficient to handle the problems that were continuing to come forward. So they had 3 objectives for this new set of reforms that they wanted to bring in. So one was, at the time, the Dean of Students had both an adjudicative role and an investigative role, and they wanted to separate those. They wanted to take away the investigation part and hand that to somebody else. The other thing was they wanted to train the Judicial Hearing Board. They wanted them to have legal training about Minnesota state law as pertained to assault, and they wanted them to know something about, although I'm not sure they called it that at that time, but trauma and informed care. They wanted to understand more about how to talk with survivors. So, and the last thing, importantly, was they wanted to specify in policy that campus proceedings could happen in tandem with any police investigations or a criminal proceeding. They wanted that in policy because they knew that wasn't happening. They knew that was a stumbling block that survivors were having when they reported. But at the end of 1989, President Lewis, interceded in the process. So students were planning these 3 reforms. This SPC committee was had these in draft, and Lewis substituted with his legal counsel his own draft of the policy, which superseded their own. And he told them, this is in the Carletonian, I'm not saying this, he told them that they could not vote on the draft that they had created. They were only allowed to vote on his draft. And what his draft did was not only not include the 3 new reforms that they were trying to bring forward, but it removed the 9 other reforms that they had just gotten passed with a lot of work in 1987. And furthermore, his new policy totally removed the words sexual assault and totally removed an appeals process. So, what was known in December, well, I should say it this way, that happened in December of '89. And also in December of '89, the college was sued by these 4 plaintiffs but students on campus wouldn't know it until 15 months later. So, at the start of 1990, the policy process had been overtaken, and at the same time, the college was being sued, and at the very same time, there was another different serial predator on campus. So, in January of 1990, a freshman got drunk at a small party at a room in Burton and passed out and was raped while unconscious. The next day, she confronted her assailant, she tracked him down, and he admitted it to her face. He had had sex with her while she was unconscious. She reported it right away to Rosenrod, but decided not to file a formal complaint. But in 4 months' time, she heard he had raped 2 other people, and she spoke with one of them. And then she decided, it's a matter of public safety. I need him to go through a campus adjudication process. I have to get other people safe from this guy. So she presented all her evidence to the Judicial Hearing Board and told them that what had happened to her was considered third-degree criminal sexual assault by Minnesota law. But nonetheless, they let him off. His defense was she didn't resist, and he got no punishment. A year later, there was a sort of a strange residential situation where the assailant was living in a single, right next door to a single with no one else on the floor. And the woman who was living next to him, one day,
Hello, that's me.
Yes! Well, you might be able to do question and answer for us later. Hi, Al. So, Al, who was living next door to him, observed him dragging a woman into his room, who was obviously trying to get away, and she tried to help the woman. And when she couldn't, the door was closed and the woman was inside his room, she called security. And security was able to free this woman, who was not a Carleton student. So, when she wanted to move, she told Carleton that she didn't feel safe living in a single, next to a single, with this guy, and she wanted to move. They would not help her. And her dad got involved and had multiple contacts with the college trying to help her get a safe room. And eventually what happened was she got a list of beds that were available and was told, like, make your own way. Find yourself another room, which she did. When news of the lawsuit hit, students got really upset. There was a giant rally of 200 people for 3 hours. And some of them demanded that Rosenrod step down. They stomped off to Lewis's office and to Rosenrod's office and said, we want him to resign from his position. But nothing happened, and by the way, this assailant graduated right on time. The suit, however, did change things. So, as I mentioned, there were 3 pieces of legislation that were brought forward, and the things they specified were that colleges had to make clear the difference between, by definition in their policy, define sexual harassment versus sexual assault. So the very thing that Lewis had stripped from policy just 2 years before had to be put back in. And Lewis created an ad hoc committee to put that back in. The other thing it specified, again, in direct response to what happened at Carleton, was that colleges had to assist students who wanted to report to the police. Excuse me. So in the aughts, a new administration was making the right kinds of noises. We care, we want the policy to work right, but it wasn't enough, because assaults kept happening and rapists kept getting off. And part of that was that at the time, the administration had a stance toward sexual assault of reform rather than removal. So they were very proud of this idea of we're going to educate people. And while that might work okay for someone who has accidentally assaulted someone, it doesn't work so well for someone who is premeditated and operating in a serial fashion. And during the aughts, it was at the very beginning of the aughts, there was date rape drugs on campus, and that continued throughout the decade. So, because of that stance of reform over removal, they were handing out punishments of probation and educational counseling as a punishment for rape, which left serial predators on campus to rape again, and still none of these rapes were reported to the police. Almost none. I don't know if there were. Absolutely none. As far as I know, there were none. But after one serial predator jumped out, his MO was to lie in hiding, and he jumped out at someone, attacked her. He also had a strangulation MO, strangled her, raped her in a basement laundry room. She went directly to the police, as well as reporting to the school. And of course, the bruises on her neck were evidence that this was not a he said, she said situation. There were some Carls that had started an independent magazine covering culture and politics. This is an award-winning student magazine called The Lens. And in the summer issue of 2007, they ran an article that started, "At least 4 perpetrators of sexual assault known to the administration currently attend Carleton. At least 2 of them have been accused of later further acts of sexual harassment or assault." Just want to mention that most assaults are not committed by serial rapists, but these guys provide a bracing example of just how poorly the system was working. So, you might be wondering, whoops, wait a second. Hold on. You might be wondering, isn't this all water under the bridge? What can we do about this, just besides feeling bad? Harm and suffering is not removed by the mere passage of time. Misplaced priorities on the part of Carleton and regrettable case treatment of not just cases but people led to unnecessarily bad outcomes for survivors who had to manage surviving not just rape, but something else, which is institutional betrayal. They reported suffering from mental health issues, academic delays, failing grades. Some left, some were expelled for failing grades, though the rapists weren't. We lost members of our community, and they lost their Carleton education. Let's look at some data. So, Mary Cox actually it started in 1978. She did her first study on campus sexual assault and found that 1 in 4 women reported being assaulted. So just to be clear, sexual assault is a giant category, right? Our language is still not so great for this. So it can include rape, but it also can include unwanted touch of all kinds. She found that 1 in 4 women were having that experience in 1978. And those results, while some studies now find 1 in 5, there are still studies that show 1 in 4. What I'm telling you is, in 45 years, this has not budged. So, if we assume Cox's research findings, that means 2,589 women were sexually assaulted at Carleton between 1980 and 2019. And now, I'm going to let Austin speak for a moment here about some original research and data creation that Austin did. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Okay. So I'm going to go back a little further than 60 years. So we collected data on gender identity. Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, we collected data on gender identity, and I will preface this with gender identity historically was different than how we think about it today. It was very binary. So I apologize if I'm offending people, but I'm going with the data that we could have access to. So this is student data, it comes from the college. Tom introduced me to somebody who gave me this data, and I supplemented it with some recent stuff. So if you go back to 1938, the top part of the graph shows the number of students broken down by men and women, and the bottom is a percentage. So it tells a pretty interesting story that you can sort of see in the post-war years. In the 40s, a large influx of women, and then it changed immediately after the end of the war. There was a lot more men on campus. As we moved into the 50s and 60s, we hit a point of 55 or 60% male students. And I believe President Strong had a goal of a 60% male to female, 60-40s, and they didn't quite reach that goal. So, we found the quote. Do you remember, was it President Strong?
Gould, I think.
Gould. I'm sorry. I don't. Okay, thank you, Martha. Martha found it.
It was a strategic plan that set a policy of aiming to have about a 55, 45, or even 60, 40.
Okay. So they were they were in that range. Well, things did change for the students. So this is the 70s. It started dramatically change, and from then on, it has been very close to equal. There's a lot of noise there. This is sort of the first year class. So that was interesting, an interesting perspective that we saw along the way. Another population I looked at was faculty. This was data that's a lot harder to get, but and so the trend, I think, is somewhat similar in that we'll see, but the gap is wider. So we see, male-dominated faculty for decades, and it started to change around the same time. You see there's a downward slope starts in the 70s, and it goes forward. And people ask why. I don't know why. The data doesn't tell me why. I have some ideas that might have been timeline, might have been ideas on society's changing, but it definitely changed. And then, according to my data, by 2015, we actually hit a point where there was a few more female faculty than male faculty. So that was an interesting story to me too. The last group I looked at, I didn't look at staff, but I did look at the trustees. And the trustees were, it was just, the gap was just incredibly wide. And it did start to change. We got the first female trustee in the 20s, but not, it was just a few. It started to change in the 70s. There's this, but I think it started. There's still change going on. There's some noise, maybe it's backtracking, maybe it's noise. There's still change going on, but there's still a definite gap, at least a decade ago. That's where I last had the data. So when you lay these on top of each other, you can sort of see what's, the institution was changing in the 70s, and it has started, and I'd say for the better. And it's these groups have gone, have had different rates of change and differences depending on the. So that is the data that I have. Oh, I will note, you lose a lot of information when you just break it down into categories of, one or the other. And so there's other things that I could go on endlessly about, but one of the interesting things is that the faculty, even though there's sort of more region parity, if you go by department, it's a really different story. Sorry. So women's languages are predominantly female. The STEM is much more male than female. The STEM subject, at least when I looked back in the last few years. That's what we found, and if you want to hear out more, you can corner me out, or you can endless terms.
hope this is gonna work. Whoop, went too far. Here we go. Okay, so I want to just help us think for a minute about what the impacts are on an individual that's survived rape. This is from Know Your Title IX. Someone's got that one, there's one table with that booklet. There it is, ta-da! That is a really awesome website with lots of survivor interviews that were quite reflective of what I heard from Carleton survivors and their experience. So just to note that all of these things, the PTSD, anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, all of those were reported by Carleton survivors. Substantial disruptions in their education, getting transferred or choosing to transfer, getting kicked out for poor grades, or leaving because they had poor grades, or dropping out because they can't deal with being on campus with the perpetrator. And importantly, many survivors end up downgrading their ambitions. They change their majors. They end up not going to grad school because they're getting their case prepared for the campus hearing board and couldn't spend that much time on their comps or with their professors, which then led to them not going to graduate school. But I want to be clear here too that it wasn't just the impact on survivors, right? Like, we all lived in this environment, and we all had this experience of the college wasn't living up to the values that we thought were the values of the place. That like honesty and integrity and caring about each other was like strangely disrupted, and it was unsettling. And it was unsettling that we had to figure out how to take care of each other, figure out how to keep each other safe in an environment where the college wasn't protecting us, fundamentally. And likewise, it was unsettling that the college appeared to be valuing the education of serial predators over the education of an unknown number of future possible victims among us. And lastly, it was really weird to have both predators and assailants in our mix. That was like a known thing. And we all have all these overlapping social circles. So when you don't solve the problem at the upper level, you're just shoving it down into the student body that has to somehow compensate for that really weird problem. So, and I want to make clear that, in case it isn't, that we were really struck by the number of men who in their current age and life and place in the world have told us that they are still uncomfortable with what happened on campus here, that they were witness to, and how they didn't know how to navigate the really weird social situation. But it does not have to be this way. So this is drawn from Sexual Citizens, a recent book that I really recommend and like a lot. And this statement, our goal is to impel action, but from a position of empathy and understanding rather than fear. It was so close to my heart. When I read this, I had to put the book down. I was so excited. So this really feels like what we are trying to do in endeavoring to do better, and also specifically with the Timeline Project. What we tried to do with the Timeline Project was knit together a fragmented history for a whole cloth view, right? When you're students, you have a 4-year snapshot, and you have no idea, probably, what happened 4 years before you or 4 years after you. So getting this like strung together, multi-decade view was something we wanted to create, so we could all have a common platform for thinking about what happened here. Are there any patterns? Is there something we can learn from? What could we do better? So our team, our researchers, spent 2.5 years reviewing every week of the Carletonian, as I mentioned to you, for 60 years. And then we examined major changes on the misconduct policy. I think I told you this. What we're not doing, I want to tell you, is we are not evaluating. This project does not have anything to do with evaluating the current state of Carleton's policies, procedures, anything else. I don't know anything about that right now, so don't ask. And also what I don't know anything about is how we compare to other colleges. We didn't do any work on looking at other colleges' histories or other colleges' relationship to this issue. I think, however, that what we have an opportunity for is institutional courage. This is Jennifer Frey's words and work. She says, institutional courage is an institution's commitment to seek the truth and engage in moral action despite unpleasantness, risk, and short-term cost. It's a pledge to protect and care for those who depend on the institution. It's a compass oriented to the common good of individuals, institutions, and the world. It's a force that transforms institutions into more accountable, equitable, and effective places for everyone. So we believe that transparency, not the repressing of information, begets trust, and that all members of our community have the right to know this information, including students. We believe that if they're invited to, alums will tell you more, and we should invite them to do that. We should welcome their contributions, even if they are critiques. We should be willing to endure discomfort. Martin Luther King Jr. said, tension is necessary for growth, and I think it's going to be necessary here. But seeking to avoid distress only leads to silence, and we have given that a jolly good try. You can't just skip reckoning, and you can't just skip reform and go straight to apology. You need to actually grapple with the issue. All right, the good news is we've already done this once. So, on the left there is a little blurb, a little article from the Carletonian in 1987. I think it's from February. Anyway, so at the time, the college was having a debate about whether women athletes deserved letter jackets. And there was a whole exchange going on in the Carletonian and letters to the editor and so on. Did they deserve letter jackets? Was the payment, could the payment be worked out? Over there on the right is Michael Thompson, and I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the athletic director's name. Maybe somebody can read it. Oh, here it is.
Georgetown.
Oh, thank you. Their letter from, I believe, 2001 that said, we're going to rectify this. And it starts by saying, we write with good news of a decision to correct a historical imbalance in the honoring of our female varsity athletes. It says, we're proud of the role that varsity athletes played in our history. However, these honors have not always been granted on equal terms. And so the purpose of this announcement is to recognize and honor the athletic dedication and achievements of decades of female athletes by retroactively awarding them an official varsity letter. And we apologize for the omission. Here's what I think we can do. We can apologize, not only to the victims, but to all the alums for the distance the college created between the values they promoted and what actually happened here. We can offer restorative justice measures to those who were harmed, things like transcript forgiveness, things like allowing them to come back and finish their degree here if they had to leave and they never completed, things like releasing plaintiffs from the NDAs that they are still under, as far as I know, that were imposed after suits. And we can ask survivors what they would want. I think we should consider using the support of alumni to turn over fresh energy. We should lean into that support if there is any reactivity, which there may well be. We think there is work to be done. We know you guys are totally up to the task, and I think Carleton is totally up to the task as well. So, this is a responsibility of our community to handle together. We can't do it alone. And we hope that Carleton will choose to take steps to return us all to our better angels and to our core values. Thank you. really welcome you to go there. This is where the Timeline Project is. I couldn't bring it to you. I couldn't represent it in a half an hour talk. It was too much. I want to welcome Dr. Would you like to speak for a moment?
Sure.
You need not.
I'll say a couple of words.
Okay.
You know, I have not prepared any remarks or response except to say I'm deeply grateful to Zandria and her colleagues for working so hard over such a long period of time on a subject that was really very difficult, both to work on, to read about, and to talk about today in this room. That can't have been easy, and you know, I applaud the courage of wanting to confront something difficult. Being new to Carleton, I can't speak to everything that has occurred in the past, though I will say my experience in previous institutions, my experience of hearing my daughter, who was Carleton class of 2015, talk about you know, her experiences here, and my own experience as a college student in the 80s gives me some sense of what we all recognize to be the enormous shifts for the better and the shifts that still need to take place in public understanding, institutional policy, and cultural attitudes towards gender equity and sexual assault. I'm, of course, more focused on Carleton's future, and I will say that students remain very active on this subject. Students are very involved and engaged, and Laura would be happy to tell you more about student work on campus around this issue, but it's something that I feel strongly about, that our Title IX office feels strongly about, and today's students feel strongly about. And so the spirit of activism that you're saluting here is certainly something that is still very much part of the Carleton landscape. So I thank you for bringing that forward.
And any questions? We have 10 minutes, and Austin's got a mic.
Hello. Hi. I just wanted to know, I know that this is all about the past, so maybe this is a question for President Byerly or for our Title IX coordinator. I'm class of 2080, and when I was assaulted, I asked to speak to one dean in particular because I wanted to speak to a woman. This was a little time had passed, and I was urged to report by my friends, and I was directed to the dean of students, who was a man. It wasn't, I kind of had just wanted to speak to a woman at the time, and I wonder if now that we have a Title IX office, are things kind of directed there immediately now? Because it was just, it wasn't a horrible experience. It was a horrible experience, right, going through it, but I just felt a bit uncomfortable going through something that has happened, that I had worked up the courage to report, and having to, you know, you have to write a paper, retelling. Yeah. Like, I had to write out everything that happened. My assailant and we said that the exact same thing took place, and it felt like a lot of the onus was on me as the person reporting. Like, well, what do you want to happen, right? And, you know, if you go to the police, we'll help you. And I was like, well, I would like to just sort of take care of this here. And I just feel like it felt a little, it wasn't, I think the process could have been smoother at the time, and I genuinely do believe that speaking to like a woman, or even like maybe somebody who just didn't present as male, I think would have made that much more easy, and I think it would have felt like that I had somebody who understood kind of what I was going through, and I just wondered if that's like a change that's been made so that young girls aren't having to retell their whole experience to, you know, an older man who is not really going to get where they're coming from. That's my question.
Thank you for that question, and thanks for sharing your experience, which I know can make it really hard to be back here, so thanks for coming back. I think one of the many pieces that is different today is having one central point of contact. And so I am that person. That was kind of the advantage of having a full-time person in this role. And so since I started in this role in 2017, we've seen a big increase in reporting. We don't think that means an increase in incidents that are happening on our campus, but rather having someone who's available, who's compassionate, who can meet one-on-one with the student and do that intake, I think is really important. So it's interesting how so many of the things that students were calling for, dozens of years ago are what are currently in place at Carleton. It kind of gives me chills to see that what they were calling for is now what we are able to have for students. And it's still really hard, right? It still takes courage to come forward and share that information. And so something that we've also brought to this work is trying to not just wait for which students are going to feel comfortable coming forward, but also doing outreach. And so being available when student organizations are meeting to kind of have a face so that folks can also develop some of that trust and rapport in the process. So I hope that answers your question. As well as having amazing confidential resources on campus. And so sometimes a student just wants to talk to someone without making that decision yet to report. And so we have those supports available for students too.
That's really heartening to know. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
So I'm Adrian Falcon. Adrian Falcon, crashing. It is not my year, but it's roughly. And believe me, I lived it with many of you in the room. And I just want to say thanks for thinking not just about the victims, but the many others of us who did live through that. And I will never forget the meeting in Bolio with Rosenrod, Lewis, and another man, and where it took a lot of courage. And there too, I raised my hand and said, what if someone has a problem going to a man to get help? And I was told by President Lewis, why? We're gonna listen. And just the chilling effect for me and everyone in that room, because we were not all victims, but we were in a different way. So thank you for understanding apology in a larger sense.
Thank you, Adrian. I'm sorry. I want to mention too the story you're telling there reminds me that I want to mention to you that on the tables there is a sheet. I welcome you to write down any stories you have, and here's a box. What we'd like to be able to do is share stories on our website so that we begin to kind of build a picture. We totally know that we don't know everything, and we'd really love for people to contribute to telling us all, starting a conversation about what was it like in the time that you were here, and knowing that that was different, in different decades. But Adrian, I really love it if you want to put down your story, and I don't know your name, but any of you who would be willing to do that, we'd really love to share those on the website so that we can all be having a conversation as well as better understanding. Hi, Kirsten.
Hi, that was fantastic.
Oh,
Really, really powerful story. And I love the context. I'm interested to know this concept of reparations and what we can do now for our community and for our kind of a larger community. How do you think that might work? Let's talk about that.
Yeah. I have not used the word reparations because I know that tends to kind of pull in ideas about money, and then people get freaked out. I would love for us to think about this sort of as something relatively simple and accessible. It's not hard, actually, to say you're sorry. And it's okay to do that more than once. You know, it's okay to start with, we know that things went awry here for decades. We know that there were serial predators that remained on campus for at least the 80s, 90s, and aughts, and that students weren't protected from them, and we apologize. And we've decided to undertake a process to investigate more about what happened here. We'd like to understand it better. This, we hope, is just a tool. We want it to be used as a tool, but there's lots of different ways of investigating what happened. And then I hope, we should move on, the college should move on to do we need to do anything differently? How does what we've learned from the past tell us, inform our understanding of the present? And from there, the steps for reconciliation I would like to see are inviting all of us to a process in reunion where victims, survivors are welcome, and we know we're going to undertake a process of some sort of acknowledgement of what happened, and making a statement of like, we're going to do something different. But I don't think I'm the expert on this. I'm just telling you, like, here's some thoughts I've had. I would love it if we undertake that as a public process that's done together, right? Like, not like, let's have a little survivor event, because that is deadly. Who would come to that? No one would come to that. Like, let's all get together and be supportive about what happened, because we were all, you know, on the spectrum, we were all present for it. So let's like be together, talk about it, and figure out some next steps. And specifically, again, I would like to see us deal with 3 specific things that have to do with survivors, directly with survivors that really don't, well, maybe it takes a little bit of money, but not much. So one is offer them transcript forgiveness. There are people who cannot get into grad school because they have flunking grades on their transcripts. This is craziness. We can do better than that. So let's offer people transcript forgiveness, and let's offer people the opportunity to come back and complete their diploma. For some of these people, it's so much water under the bridge. They went somewhere else, or they gave up their education, or whatever they did. But at least we could make an offer. Come back here, finish your degree, or we'll give you a Carleton diploma if you complete these credits somewhere else. Like, make it possible for those people to move on. And what is the last thing? Oh, the NDAs, for Pete's sake. I mean, even if NDAs have been sort of, are effectively not in place anymore because of Me Too and Harvey Weinstein and whatever, Carleton can still be the kind of principled place that says, you know what, an NDA is a crappy thing to do, and we're taking that back. Never mind. You can speak about what happened to you here, and you can speak about what happened in your adjudication process, and you can speak about anything that happened after. Please be free. We shouldn't be silencing people. That is an ugly thing to do. Thanks for asking.
That's fantastic. I'll be interested to know, and maybe as we move forward this weekend, I'll have an opportunity to figure out who makes those decisions.
Yeah.
Is that a board thing? Is that the community comes together, and the faculty, the administration, and
Yeah.
And
And I also should mention that there are resources that I think we can uncover just by making clear that we are now open to this, right? Like, for instance, Angie Hattery, who many of you may know, is a co-director of the University of Delaware's Center for the Study and Prevention of Gender-Based Violence. And she told me that she would be glad, she has not contributed to the college, and she would be glad to make a contribution towards the $15,000 it takes to bring people like Seamus Khan and, I always forget the name of the woman, somebody Hirsch, I think. Jennifer Hirsch, who wrote Sexual Citizens, or to...
They were here in 2020.
Yeah, I know. They were here recently, right? As recently as 2021, okay. Or to Jennifer Frade, who, her institutional courage model. So Angie Hattery is tapped into those people, would help set up the connection, would help make a contribution to get it off the ground. She's just one example. I'm just saying there are untapped resources for people who have logged out that could be tapped into if we can speak straight to what they really feel about it. You can't dance along on the surface. You have to be real. We have to go to the nitty-gritty, and we have to welcome people in that we know is for real. You can come back and talk to us, and we're getting underway with something serious. And if I can just say from my own point of view, please do not spend money building a garden bench. Don't do that. That doesn't do anything. Nobody wants to sit on the bench and contemplate their baby. Do something with the money. Do something functional with the money. Oh my God, it happens all over the place. Yes, it happened to Chanel Miller. Stanford.
Minneapolis has a memorial in a public park. That a group of women raised almost $500,000.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful, but it gets vandalized.
Yeah.
And that is just further
Proof of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you, Kirsten Byerly. I'm wondering if there are not larger national or maybe even, beyond convenings around, this issue that brings colleges and, others in this policy space together to, workshop ideas, best practices, and lessons learned to improve what's happening. I mean, not just here, but, everywhere.
Yeah.
Is that not something that exists or happens? Yeah.
I mean, so much has changed, right? And so, one of the pieces looking back at this is that there was not all of the laws and enforcement. I mean, Sandra walked us through all the pieces that were kind of started implementing, and now this work is very highly regulated for colleges and universities in a way that I think is very positive. And so, yes, it's now an entire profession, and a piece that's expected of every single college and university. And I think we're talking about different things, talking about this reconciliation. I think that's a big undertaking, and that there's space to have that national conversation.
I want to mention too that I understand, and I think all of us would understand, that there's no built-in staff for this, right? I mean, I don't think anybody has a job description that says, let's undertake this giant reconciliation project. So I understand that, it would take some doing on the part of the college, but that is what I'm asking for. I am asking for the college to undertake this. Even though there's no built structure for it, doesn't really, there's no plan for this, but I think it deserves a plan.
Sandra, you know that I have
Hi, Rebecca Carson, class of '82, so I'm not in my reunion. It was last year. I went to the Title IX talk, and I was involved with a C Club member last year, as it came getting recognized. And I asked the question there, and I'm stating it to you too, why did it take till 2021
I mean, varsity sports for females had started much earlier. That's not a question anyone can answer, perhaps, but I think you're exactly right. I also mentioned that I invited several people who had experienced sexual assault or trauma, and they actually came to a reunion. The college is missing out on wonderful alumni who won't come.
Yeah.
This reconciliation is a positive for the college, and they need to recognize it.
I was just going to respond to what you were saying about there's nobody's, how you begin that process, and it's nobody's job title, there's no how to get started, but I acknowledged to Xandria over the past year or so about 2 other cases of, I guess what you could call reconciliation, that came to my attention just in the media, one being history of slavery at, I think,
Georgetown.
Harvard and Georgetown.
Yeah.
And another, maybe more recent, was the Catholic nuns, I can't remember if it was a convent or a whole order or what, apologizing to Native American tribes for the history of the Indian boarding schools.
Yeah.
And, those were just kind of flashes in the media, but I would like to hope that that is the beginning of a bigger process, and it could be an interesting research project to see how those came about.
Yeah.
How did that start? And where is it going?
Yeah. With you. There's Alan there.
I appreciate that you talked about the fact that a person didn't have to be a victim of sexual assault to have it affect them. And I want to add some detail to that. I think I'm a good example of somebody who acts as a case that can show that there were sort of 2 types of victimization. There was the horrible victimization of the sexual assault itself. And then there was the secondary victimization of how the administration treated people who said something. I'm a weird case. I didn't have the first one. I only had the second one. And it affected me. It affected me more than you might imagine. Dean Rosenrod humiliated me. More importantly, Dean Rosenrod humiliated my father. My parents are not college grads. I was a Pell student. My dad called him and got so much runaround on the phone that he started writing so he'd have a record. His letters went to Rosenrod, written in his cursive online paper, again and again, not only to help me get moved out of the place, but also, even once I had moved, he kept insisting that the bad guy be moved also, and only after quite a bit of effort got him moved. Rosenrod finally agreed to move him to the all-men's floor. I have some of that correspondence, and I read it recently, and I was really sad for myself then, and I was humiliated for myself then, and I was humiliated for my dad, and I was really mistreated, and my dad was mistreated, and I'm here without a take, even though it's my year, because I'm not coming to these. I'm not going to sign up for these reunions. I don't donate to this place. I don't recommend it. I recommend St. Olaf. I recommend Beloit. I recommend Lawrence. I know we're not better or worse. I know this was every place, but this is the place who humiliated me and my family. And I graduated a term early on purpose to get out of here.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
That was brave. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that great presentation. And I'm sitting here, I was class of 86 and thinking, you know, I was aware of some of this going on, but I was also oblivious to an awful lot of what was going on around me. And as I was listening, I was thinking, you know, we carry this forward into our professional careers and what in our expectations of how women would be treated and what would happen when we reported things in our professional careers as well. I work for a federal agency now that's been struggling with how to handle sexual assault, and they made a bunch of reforms and had some reporting procedures in place for a couple years that weren't working because women or whoever was assaulted had to, if they reported to their supervisor, there was a mandatory, you know, reporting up the chain, and it didn't work because people didn't want that to happen.
Yeah.
So what is working, I think now, is, I can't remember what they call it, but like a trigger reporting. So you can report someone and nothing happens to that report unless somebody else reports that person, and then it automatically gets escalated. And I'm wondering if Carleton has anything like that, or if anybody knows if other schools do, because it seems to be a fairly effective approach, especially for these serial assaulters.
Someone over here. President Byerly has another comment. She may have to stop out.
Thank you so much for coming.
Sarah.
This is just short, just to say, Zandria, thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you to those of you who have spoken up today here sitting, you two in particular. And to say, one of the things that I'm really struck by deeply is how critical it is not to assume that just because it happened many years ago, that there isn't still repair that must be done. Not just can be, it has to be done. And I would like to say, stand up, I'm not gonna really stand up, but stand up and say, I expect it. I expect it from Carleton. Carleton, I expect this of Carleton, to take action now, real meaningful action that is repairing to the people that this happened to in all of these generations, and also is happening to the students who are here now. I mean, we have to have action, it has to be repair. That's what I have to say.
Thank you, Fiona.
And we have something with Sarah, and I'm told we have another 15 minutes before we lose the room.
Sarah, Creevy, class of 88. I'm going to say something and it's going to be a little uncomfortable, I think. So, I'm not going to apologize in advance, but I'm going to just say it'll probably be uncomfortable. Because I almost didn't come to reunion this time. My first reunion was last 5-year reunion ago, 30th. Because Beth made me come, so I did that game. There was a moment, I was on the Hill of Three Oaks, and I guess our people had kind of left. And another group came, and a man took me around the arm and started to walk me into the woods. And there was nobody else around. You know, it was loud, like down lower there was a gathering and dance music and, right, and people were up on the hill, and he was a big guy, and he'd been drinking, and luckily he changed his mind and said sorry and let me go, and I left. That was 5 years ago. I can say it now, and I'm here now because I loved my Carleton education. Like, I'm so grateful to have been at this place. But what you've told us today, Zandria, helps explain a kind of pervasive fear that I think was part of our Carleton experience. Why the F do we need to take back the night? What was, right?
Yeah.
The fact that we just can't, as human beings, walking in this world, feel safe. So, and the reason I say something that happened, it happened at reunion, and it was, you know, I guess I was looking like at least a decade or, you know, 2 younger than I am. This guy, you know, was trying to walk up, but so there's another facet that we're not talking about, which is some things are opportunistic, and alcohol is often involved. I love my red wine, but maybe part of the conversation also needs to be about responsibility, you know, responsible consumption of alcohol. I hope there's some things going on at Carleton that also address the types of aggression that become sexual aggression. Not always males towards females, but that as well. And is Warren here? Is Warren in here? No? Warren Jerv, best postcard writer ever. So Warren has sent me so many postcards asking me to donate. Dear Sarah, just donate a little bit to Carleton. And I finally did. I was like, oh God, finally. Okay, Warren. So when I see Warren, I'll tell him thanks for this postcard. And I really had, I thought of contacting alumni fairs and saying something like to just let somebody know that, you know, reunion should be a safe place too.
Wow.
So I feel better telling you all, but also I guess just like let's all look out for each other and use alcohol responsibly, and try to find ways for men to talk about their responsibility here too. And Zandria, wow, you rock. This is amazing and awesome.
I also think Zandria rocks. It's awesome. This was really powerful. But my point is, my world is not having much to do with any of the issues we talked about today. But I do have 2 daughters, and this is not done. And my daughters and their friends have been harmed by similar activities. It's not over. So I'm very interested in making the world safe for young women already who are out there who we may all, you know, maybe our kids. That's one point. The second point, though, is we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Peace and reconciliation is not a new concept. It's an old concept that has been developed in other contexts. I spent 16 years covering Northern Ireland. There's a lot of lessons where people were shooting each other for a long time, and they let people out of prison, and they developed a new society. It looks different now. It looks different now in South Africa. It looks different in a lot of places. There are lessons that can be learned that are comparative. They're different, but the mechanics of it, the theory of peace and reconciliation is there, and I think that this is an opportunity for Carleton to use our good Carleton brains and to find those connections and find out where they have been and to move forward using them.
Thanks, Heidi. I'll also say that Endeavoring to Do Better had a project proposal for a reconciliation and pitched that to the school about 3 years ago. And initially they said, first of all, they wanted it to be a standalone event just for survivors, and we pushed back on that and said we wanted it to be embedded in reunion. They initially said it was a good idea, and then about 6 weeks later said it wasn't a fit, and that was the end of that. So my hope would be, one of the challenges for Endeavoring to Do Better has been, all of these 5 years, how do we reach more people? How can we get access to more people who would support this? And my hope would be that, that now there would be some more push from a broader group of people about we really do need to do this. Like Fiona said, it feels necessary and overdue, frankly.
And I would just add, this meeting almost didn't happen. I'm just going to be.
That is
I think
true.
we need to say that. This meeting almost didn't happen shortly before, a couple of weeks ago. A couple of weeks ago, Sandra was told that there were some liability issues and therefore this wouldn't happen, and that's why it's not on the print agenda. And that's why we did a little bit of social media and got in touch with how things were back in the 80s and put up some posters on Field Hill. I still know how to do those like that. So I think this is an amazing turnout. I think it shows that it's a really key issue, and I think the college, I think, has gotten at least our message from those in this room, and the lawyers always say no. You have to keep going, and you have to think about the bigger context. And I would just say, in terms of reputational risk, saying no to a group who wants to do something about a longstanding problem is really bad optics, and it's bad for your reputation, and it's a reputational risk, and that's not going to help Carleton.
Thanks for having that.
Are there for Carleton to be a model?
Yes,
Yes.
Carleton
Who else
can
has
do
done
better.
this? Yes.
And that involves, I mean, things have really changed in many ways structurally, but you have to acknowledge what happened. You can't just sweep it under the rug.
Thanks, Heidi. I'm glad you added all of that.
Zandria, on the website,
yes,
is there a place that people who would like to be a cog in the wheels of justice that you guys are getting started? Is there a place to sign up? Is there a place that we can say, hey, I can help? We can.
Yeah.
I know alums that aren't here. Everybody here probably knows alums that aren't here. We can, build the activist engine here.
That's a great idea. Fortunately, I know a really good tech guy.
So, next, maybe even just, since it's not up there yet, and we've got the momentum, there's people in the room right here, maybe, I know I would put my email down on a list before you leave the room, I'm willing to be contacted, I'm willing to contact other people, but we can get that going.
That would be great. Thank you for thinking of that, Kristen. What people could do, if you're willing, is flip over one of those sheets that invites you to tell your story, and just at your table, put down your names and then leave it on the table, and we'll collect those. Yeah, or you can put it in the office.
You write your email address up on the board, or scribbly up there?
Second, the email address, it's on that sheet.
And also these, right?
And also on the business cards. Yeah, feel free to take cards. I have a bunch of many.
This is old school.
Did I make that clear? Thanks, Kristen. Did that make sense? Like, if you want your name added to, like, yes, I'm interested, I would help, I would do more. Flip over one of those sheets, put your name and contact information, at least email, but actually also your phone number helps. And please write clearly so I can tell what it says. Hi, Kate. Thank you.
So can we email somebody or tell our friends to email or make two different ways?
Or add your name on this list.
Add your name.
Bottom of this website. His email address.
Oh, thanks, Austin. Do I? Oh, it doesn't.
That's not the website.
It's just a screenshot of the website. It's not scrollable. Sorry. Any other questions? Anything else? If you spoke, I'm probably gonna come and talk to you for a moment and just see if you would be willing to write down your story, or even have someone transcribe it. Thank you all for coming so much.